What if the most loving thing you could do for someone was to do nothing at all? Not to chase, not to fix, not to explain. Just to step back and let her feel it. Let her doubt the choices she swore were right. Let her wonder about the silence where your presence used to be. Let her regret what she thought would never cost her, because sometimes growth doesn't begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with absence. Every decision we make ripples outward into the world. When we act, especially from a place of emotion, ego, or impulse, we set in motion a chain of consequences that can't be undone just because we later change our mind. This is true for everyone, regardless of gender or circumstance. But in the context of let her doubt, let her wonder, let her regret, we are focusing on what it means to allow a person, particularly a woman in this case, to live with the results of her choices without stepping in to rescue her from the aftermath. Not because we want to be cruel, but because we understand something deeper about human development, that growth is earned, not given, and pain is often the price of wisdom. There is a growing cultural reflex that tells us to rush in with explanations, affirmations, and justifications the moment someone expresses distress about a decision they've made. But this reflex, while often masked as compassion, is frequently an avoidance of confrontation, not just with others, but with reality itself. We want to believe that people are always acting in their best interest, always justified, always deserving of a safe landing, no matter the choices they've made. But that's not how the world works, and it's not how character is built. When someone acts out of selfishness, disloyalty, pride, or short-sightedness, it is not cruel to allow them to experience the natural results of those choices. In fact, it's essential. If a woman, for example, walks away from someone who cared for her, who showed up for her, who offered stability and respect, and she does it in favor of a fantasy, a thrill, or simply the belief that she could always return later if things didn't work out, then the consequences of that decision must be allowed to play out. If she later realizes that what she left behind was rare and rooted in something real, she must feel that loss fully. Not because we wish suffering upon her, but because it is the only way the lesson will take root. You cannot grow into a deeper human being without having confronted the weight of your own errors. And more importantly, no one should be spared from the understanding that their actions affect others, that there are costs, that time lost cannot always be regained, and that sometimes you don't get to come back. We live in a time where people are conditioned to think they can have everything, that all options remain open forever, that doors never truly close, but reality is less forgiving. When you walk out of someone's life, you don't get to demand that the door stays open just in case you change your mind. When you break something precious, you don't get to be upset that it doesn't work the same when you come back. There is no growth without ownership, and ownership requires being allowed, even forced, to sit with the results of what you've done. Letting someone experience that is not an act of revenge, it's a discipline. It means you respect them enough to treat them as an adult. It means you believe they are capable of more, but only if they go through the necessary crucible. If you constantly rush in to buffer the fall, they will never truly land. And if they never land, they will never look around and say, this place I ended up in, I built this, and I don't want to build it again. So when she doubts, let her. Let the silence echo loud enough for her to hear herself clearly, perhaps for the first time, because that's where accountability begins, and accountability is where everything meaningful starts. Doubt is not a flaw in the human experience, it is a feature. It is the first, often uncomfortable sign that the mind is beginning to question the story it once confidently told itself. When a person starts to doubt their actions, their decisions, their values, or even their identity, that moment holds a deep, transformative potential. It is the space between certainty and collapse, and if allowed to unfold honestly, it becomes the birthplace of responsibility. But it has to be allowed. You cannot talk someone out of their doubt just because it's inconvenient, painful, or destabilizing. You must let it work through them, like a storm clears the sky. That storm is necessary. When a woman begins to doubt what she did, who she hurt, or whether the path she chose was truly hers or just a performance for the world, you do not smother that doubt with empty reassurance. You do not tell her you did what you had to do, or you shouldn't feel guilty, because what if she should? What if that guilt is the very beginning of her inner compass realigning itself after being bent by fear, pride, or impulse? What if the doubt is not weakness, but moral clarity struggling to emerge, to interfere with that process, to distract her, to soothe her prematurely, to tell her she was always right, is to deny her the right to become more than she was. Doubt, real doubt, tears at the illusion of innocence. It dismantles the lie that we are always the victim of circumstance. It is the mind saying, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe I'm capable of things I didn't want to admit. Maybe the people I blamed were right to walk away. These are devastating thoughts. But they are necessary ones, because until we question the internal narrative, we remain prisoners of it. Doubt is the key that unlocks that cell. People often try to bury doubt beneath distractions. They chase new experiences, new relationships, louder voices of affirmation. They look for places where no one will ask them hard questions and no one will challenge the righteousness of their story. But doubt does not die. It waits. It shows up in the quiet moments. It speaks when the noise fades. And if a person is lucky enough or brave enough to sit still long enough, they might begin to hear what it has to say. That is the point when change becomes possible. But the problem is this: our culture is deeply allergic to doubt, especially when it appears in people we believe we should protect. We don't want her to feel uncertain. We want her to feel empowered, even if her power came at the cost of others. We want her to feel strong, even if that strength was used to justify betrayal or denial. But true strength is not the absence of doubt. It is the courage to face it, to walk through it, to ask, what have I done and who have I become? Letting her doubt is not about watching her suffer. It's about giving her the dignity of her own reckoning. Because when you deny someone their doubt, you deny them their freedom. You keep them in a prison of unchallenged assumptions and borrowed truths. You make them smaller than they could be. And you ensure that the same patterns will repeat, only in different clothes, with different people. Doubt is not the enemy of confidence, it is its forerunner. Because once a person has looked at their past with unflinching honesty and still chooses to move forward, they do so with a different kind of certainty, one rooted in humility, in awareness, and in earned wisdom. That kind of person doesn't speak from a script. They speak from experience, and their voice carries weight. Wonder is a uniquely human experience. It is the mind's reaching, stretching, beyond the immediate facts of life into the possibilities of what could have been, what might yet be, and what choices shape the present moment. When someone wonders, they are stepping into a higher level of consciousness, not just remembering, but reflecting, not just seeing, but perceiving. And in that space of wonder, truth often reveals itself not as a harsh blow, but as a quiet unveiling. Letting someone wonder, especially in the aftermath of a major decision, is one of the most powerful and respectful acts you can commit. When a woman begins to wonder about the path she chose, it means she is beginning to see the path she didn't. And that process, that imaginative revisiting of moments where she turned left instead of right, is where real self-awareness takes root. It's one thing to know you walked away from something or someone. It's another thing entirely to sit with the question, what if I hadn't? What would that life have been like? What kind of person might I have become? Would I feel more peace? Would I be more grounded? These questions are not just fantasies. They are mirrors, and they do what the ego often refuses to. They show us the faces we could have worn if we had chosen differently. Wonder introduces contrast. It forces the mind to compare what is with what could have been. This isn't about regret, not yet. It's about possibility. The silent awareness that reality did not have to unfold this way. And for someone who has spent their time justifying every decision, avoiding blame, or rewriting the past to protect their pride, wonder is an unwelcome but necessary guest. It disturbs the script. It interrupts the illusion. It challenges the ego with its quiet, persistent presence. What if you were wrong? But this process cannot be forced. You cannot make someone wonder. You can only step back far enough that your absence becomes a question mark. When the calls stop, when the door doesn't open again, when the world she once took for granted goes still, then and only then the wondering begins. And it is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a small voice late at night. Sometimes it's a memory triggered by a smell, a song, a phrase, but it builds, it accumulates. And slowly, the present reality starts to be measured against what was lost. Wonder, if allowed to bloom without interference, becomes the soil in which empathy grows. When a person wonders about the heart they hurt, the trust they broke, or the time they wasted, they begin to feel, not just know, what their actions meant to someone else. They no longer see the past as just a chapter they closed, but as a living consequence they are still a part of. And in that realization, they become more human, less selfish, more open to truth, less addicted to self-preservation. But again, this only happens if we resist the urge to control the narrative for them. If you rush in with explanations, if you try to remind her of why she left or try to argue your worth, then the wonder collapses. You've given her a conclusion instead of letting her discover one. And any insight she may have gained will be tainted by defensiveness, not earned through insight. There is no strength in that. Wonder is sacred. It's the mind's way of touching humility without being forced. It's the soft turning of the heart towards something real, something missed, something once held and now gone. And that process, though slow and quiet, carries more power than any argument ever could. Because what you wonder about, you begin to care about. And what you care about, you start to understand. Regret is one of the most misunderstood experiences in the emotional spectrum. People often try to avoid it, escape it, or pretend it doesn't exist. They throw around phrases like "no regrets," as if regret is a weakness or a flaw in character. But in reality, regret is a mark of consciousness. It's the internal signal that a person has crossed a boundary within themselves, whether moral, emotional, or relational, and now stands on the other side of it, with the knowledge that something meaningful was lost in the process. That loss and the emotional gravity it carries is not a punishment. It's an education. When a woman begins to regret, especially after making a choice that cost her something real, whether it was love, trust, or opportunity, what's happening inside her is not just sadness, it's awareness. She is beginning to see herself not just through her own eyes, but through the eyes of the person she hurt, or the path she abandoned. Regret pulls her out of her personal narrative and places her into the larger picture. It brings with it the realization that not all decisions are equal, and not all wounds can be soothed by justification. There are moments when logic fails, when all the reasons she gave herself for doing what she did begin to ring hollow. That is where regret speaks the loudest. But regret only transforms a person if it's allowed to sit. If she is allowed to feel it without interference, without someone rushing in to rewrite the story for her, then regret becomes a turning point. It burns away pride. It dismantles denial. It forces a confrontation with the truth. Often the one truth she was trying hardest to avoid. That maybe she made a mistake. Maybe she misjudged someone. Maybe she threw away something rare, something steady, something good, and now it's gone. That kind of realization is a heavy thing to carry, but it's also one of the few forces strong enough to restructure the self. You cannot comfort someone into character. You cannot remove regret from them and expect them to grow. Growth is the child of reflection and discomfort. Regret provides both. It reveals what was once hidden behind ego and rationalization. It calls into question the narratives she's told herself to sleep at night. It brings her face to face with the consequences she didn't consider, or worse, didn't care about at the time. And in that confrontation, something crucial happens. She starts to take ownership. Responsibility doesn't come naturally to everyone, especially not in a world where blame can always be shifted and accountability can be dodged with clever language or temporary validation. But regret doesn't negotiate. It lingers. It revisits. It asks again and again, was it worth it? And if she's listening, really listening, the answer might not be what she wants to hear, but it will be what she needs to hear. Regret, if faced honestly, can strip away illusions faster than any lecture or consequence. It humbles. It slows a person down, creates silence where once there was noise and excuses. And in that silence, she can begin to reconstruct herself, not from a place of delusion or defiance, but from clarity, from an honest look at the past, no matter how painful. And when she finally speaks again, it won't be to defend the person she used to be. It will be to mourn her and to make space for the person she might still become. There is a deep temptation in human nature to shield the people we care about from discomfort, especially when that discomfort comes as a result of their own decisions. We think we are helping when we step in to soothe, to soften the blow, to explain away the pain they're beginning to feel. But this instinct, however well-meaning it might appear, often works against the very growth we claim to want for them. When someone acts in a way that brings suffering upon themselves through betrayal, selfishness, dishonesty, or arrogance, they are standing at the edge of a lesson. And if you interfere, if you try to take the edge off the experience or minimize its sting, you rob them of the opportunity to learn from it. People grow through tension, not ease. We don't develop character from comfort. We develop it from friction, internal and external. That friction comes when the reality they created collides with the reality they now must face. And if you keep them from feeling that impact, they'll walk away with the illusion that actions are disconnected from consequences, that choices live in a vacuum, that they can behave however they please and the world will simply bend around their wishes. That is not compassion. That is sabotage in disguise. There's a particular kind of clarity that only comes through consequence. It's not theoretical, and it's not something that can be explained into a person. It has to be felt. You can warn someone all you want, but until they touch the fire, the warning remains just a sound. The heat has to be real. The damage has to be undeniable. Only then does the mind begin to reorder itself around the truth, and that reordering is the very essence of transformation. It is the dismantling of the previous self and the slow, painful construction of something wiser. Letting someone sit in that discomfort is not an act of cruelty. It's an act of respect. You are acknowledging that they are a moral agent, capable of reflection, capable of facing themselves. You are saying, I believe you are strong enough to wrestle with this. It's a vote of confidence, not punishment. Because shielding someone from the consequences of their behavior is to infantilize them. It's to tell them, in essence, that they cannot handle reality, that they must be coddled or rescued from the weight of their own choices. But strength is not born that way. Integrity is not forged in insulation. It's born in the fire of accountability. Some lessons only arrive when no one picks up the phone, when the apology doesn't come, when the silence stretches longer than expected, when the person they took for granted no longer stands in the same place. Those moments are teachers. And though they may not wear the face of kindness, they are often the only voices that finally cut through the noise. They teach humility, they teach presence, they teach the cost of decisions made in haste or pride. And more than anything, they teach that love, trust, and respect are not infinite resources. They can be damaged, they can be lost, and they are not guaranteed to return. To try to prevent someone from feeling these truths is to stunt their development. It's to lock them into cycles of denial and repetition, where the same mistakes are made, the same hearts are hurt, and the same excuses are rehearsed. The only way out of that loop is through the difficult, raw confrontation with consequence. Not theoretical, not abstract, but personal and undeniable. That is where change begins. Not with comfort, not with rescue, but with the courage to let people face the mirror they've earned. Time is not infinite. It's one of the few things in life we can never reclaim once it's gone. People often move through the world as if they can pause it, as if opportunities will wait for them, as if relationships can be placed on a shelf and returned to whenever they're ready. But that's a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the truth, that time moves forward whether we're ready or not. And with it, people do too. When someone walks away, chooses wrongly, or turns their back on something meaningful, they rarely consider that the door might not be there when they try to return. They assume it will be because it always was, until it's not. Letting someone live with the reality that they may not be able to come back is one of the hardest yet most important things we can do. Not because it punishes them, but because it teaches them the most basic law of life, that actions carry weight and time is not their servant. When you allow a person to truly experience the fact that the chapter they closed might never reopen, you are not being unkind, you are being honest. The idea that someone can exit your life, harm you, disregard your value, and then reappear when they feel lonely or reflective, expecting the same warmth, the same welcome, is born from a fantasy where permanence is assumed. But permanence only exists where mutual effort and respect are maintained. Once those are broken, nothing is guaranteed. The world doesn't revolve around second chances. Sometimes they happen, often they don't. And people who assume they will always have one live in a suspended reality. They don't feel the urgency to act right the first time. They don't feel the weight of now. They gamble with moments, believing they can buy them back later. But love is not a savings account. Trust is not a safety net. And human hearts do not operate on demand. Letting someone learn this on their own, in the quiet spaces where they start to look back and wonder why the phone no longer rings, why the door remains shut, why the person they left behind has moved on, is a necessary part of their growth. It's a painful realization, but a clarifying one. It teaches them that they do not exist in a vacuum, that their choices do not vanish into thin air, that while they were out chasing something new, the world kept spinning. And the people they thought would always be there changed, grew, healed, or simply stopped waiting. This is not about bitterness. It's about boundaries. It's about teaching someone through absence what your presence meant. Because sometimes the only language the soul understands is loss. Not the loss of material things, but the loss of access, the loss of comfort, the loss of someone who was once there unconditionally. When that person is no longer there, it sends a deeper message than any speech or confrontation ever could. And if they come back expecting the same dynamic, the same emotional availability, the same role you once played, they'll be met with a different version of you, one shaped by reality, not fantasy. One who knows that time given is not a gift that can be demanded twice. One who has learned that letting go is sometimes the highest form of self-respect. So when she realizes she can't come back, not because you hate her, but because the moment has passed and cannot be rewound, she will come face to face with the cost of what she lost. And in that moment, she will understand something that words could never teach, that time, once gone, belongs to no one. And so in the end, the silence we allow, the space where doubt is not silenced, where wonder is not dismissed, where regret is not consoled, and where consequences are not softened, becomes the most honest teacher of all. To let her doubt is to respect her capacity for self-inquiry. To let her wonder is to honor her mind's reach for what she once ignored. To let her regret is to believe she is strong enough to bear the truth. And to let her feel the permanence of your absence is to show her that time answers no one's ego. This is not about revenge, nor bitterness, nor cruelty. It is about allowing a human being to confront themselves without interruption. Because real growth does not happen in comfort. It happens in the tension between who we were and who we could have been. If she is to become more honest, more whole, more awake, it won't be because you rescued her from the weight of her choices. It will be because you stepped aside and let life speak. And if she listens, truly listens, she may find in that silence not only loss, but the first glimpse of her own becoming.